Greetings, welcome to recap video number 6 for Project Dig. Project Dig is a 2D multiplayer automation survival sandbox game that I am developing entirely on Twitch and uploading the VODs to YouTube. We're going to be doing a recap video about the scripting support using Lua and Soul. I'm going to go over like how we added in binding support for that so that our engine and Lua can communicate, and how we automated that. Not the best way possible, but we did. And then how we are using that. So let's dive in. So how it works is that we need bindings to have Soul and or have Lua and C++ communicate. And so bindings look something like this, where we can specify, we expose our classes to Lua and saying that it's like a new user type or a new enum or whatever. And then whenever we tell Lua, hey, this is something that we're wanting to use, it knows how to actually handle that. And that's all really supported through Soul, which is this awesome Lua binding library. And so we have that set up. It's a lot that we have to write though. There's a lot of stuff here, and so I didn't want to have to write this out every single time we update something, or like managing this is a lot of work. I did it for Korea and I didn't want to do it again. So I came up with this idea. Well, actually, I kind of stole it from Handmade Hero, Casey Muratori. But anyways, this introspection of having these macros that we can kind of prepend to our classes or variables, functions, and we can parse that information and then use that to generate the user types that we expose to Lua. So I added these in, so we have like Lua user type with no constructor, so we don't want Lua to ever be able to construct it, a templated class, namespace, an enum, and then also we have stuff like we can say, hey, this is a constructor that we want to be exposed, or a function, or overloaded function, or a templated function, and variables, and read-only variables, and property getters, and property setters, and all that fun stuff. And so in the wild, it can look like, let me find a good example. I think we have some in here. So here's one where I expose this prefab namespace and expose specific functions in here. Or in world, we say, hey, this world, we don't want it to be constructed in Lua, but we want Lua to actually know how to use the world to some degree, because we want to be able to get components for entities in Lua. So we expose these functions. We even have some templated functions here. And we even did some crazy things where we can have our Lua types be tagged, and then we can say, hey, we want everything within that tag to have a specialization for this. So if we jump over to our Lua user types for the world, we can see we have like get transform and get render and get animation. Those are all components that we have set up. And that is all happening in this Lua expose class. So it's a crazy script. It's doing a lot of things where it's parsing this all of our header files, and then it's trying to extract that these templates, or not templates, these little tokens like Lua Func template or Lua Func, Lua user type. So it takes those tokens and then is able to end all of the stuff that's on that line or whatever, parses it, and then uses that to generate these CPP files. So we actually have a handful of them: Lua user type, utility, and UI. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. So we generate these files, and that just exposes everything for us. So that way we can easily expose new stuff. So like if I'm ever writing something new, we just have to go into like, let's find a good example. This is all utility stuff. Yeah, so let's go to the UI bar. So here, when we wanted to expose this, I just needed to say Lua user type no constructor, and then expose like Lua func for these create functions, and then a few other things that I wanted to expose here, and it's able to generate it. We just have to say, hey, let's generate this. We run that script, and it parses all the files just like this, and then we can actually use that generated stuff. It's awesome. It's great. It works well. So what did we use that for? Why are we wanting to do this Lua scripting in the first place? There's a few reasons. One is because we wanted to be able to expose our prefabs, and another is because we wanted to be able to hot reload our prefabs. So that's what we did. Before I move on from this Lua expose, I later found out that there are probably much better ways to go about doing this, so I wouldn't recommend doing it like this. There's ways that you can have, like, kind of compile C++ and use that information. I'm forgetting the name. It's like ATS or something. I forget. But I didn't really investigate well enough before I started developing this. Oh well. Say don't do this. Be smart. All right, so prefabs. So we want to have prefabs like this, where we can say, hey, I want to initialize this new prefab that's a door, and that can have collision, and we can put more and more stuff into our prefabs, and it then will actually put together a prefab out of all this. So these are like different components that we can have, and we have support for templates. So I can say, hey, I want to have a prefab.item, which might have like an item component and a render component, and a bunch of stuff preset for us. So that way we can just like specify a few points of data, and it fills in the rest for us. So on the C++ side, that it looks like this, and I mentioned earlier that I exposed this prefab namespace, so that's actually what we're using here in our script. And so this will, whenever we run it, we are calling like this initialize function that parses a bunch of information and fills out the prefab for us. So we're kind of like, the idea is that we run through all of our prefab files, we execute them in Lua, and they end up calling back into our C++ that fills in our components, and then we add that prefab to our prefab stash once it finishes loading. One really cool thing that we can do with that is then reload our prefabs. So if we are, we're running the game and we decide we want to change something, so we have these doors here. We want to make it so that maybe the door, these are just icons right now, imagine in the future, we want our doors to have a different collision. Like maybe we want them to be taller. We could say, well, let's actually make this be something like 38 or 36 and then -8. So now, oh, whoops, that's the wrong file. Sorry, we need to go to the door. -8, 36. Now they are, whoops, that's not taller. Well, it's a good thing we have this hot reloading so we can fix stupid mistakes like that. Hey, there we go. Now it's kind of taller. 16, I guess this actually should be 40 if we wanted to be even. So yeah, we can just mess around with this stuff, and we can see this green box is the collision for the door, and so we can just play around with it, do whatever we want, and see those changes affect the game immediately. And they don't only affect existing items, we can have it affect new items too. So that's really great. We'll be able to iterate on the prefabs and change content very quickly while the game is running. And it does some really cool things with being able to update all of the components for that prefab. So it's like it goes through all of the entities that exist, or all of the components that have changed for this prefab, and it takes a byte diff of the previous component and this new component, and it applies it to all of the components that are made from this prefab, that that entity type. So it does some really cool things with that. That's what's happening in this world apply. Ends up calling over into here, so we can add new components and remove components if they were removed, and if it changed, then it will properly handle that in here. And it does some cool things with the byte diff. Yeah, so that's awesome. And once we finished that, we moved over to our UI, and we wanted to do something very similar where we have our UI using Lua, and we can write our UI and also have it be hot reloaded. So that took quite some time because there's a lot of features that were missing in our Lua expose script that I needed to add in, and so we did that. And we ended up getting something like this. There's a lot of commented out code here because it's still a little bit work in progress, but for the most part it's working. So we can you can see our script here, and we can actually change it while the game is running. So we could just move this off to the side, and then we can do things like, oh, you know what, I don't really want this deny button anymore, so let's just move that, comment it out, and bam, it's gone. So we can easily add and remove stuff, and we can see it hot reloading. And there's a lot of things that we ended up deciding to do here with the UI, for setting it up. It ends up passing in the view, so it kind of creates a view. We specify the type of view we want, so we can say, hey, we want a dialogue. It knows what that is, and so it creates a new dialogue. We can set up the name and the handle for it, and then whenever it wants to set it up, actually specify the entire view, how everything is laid out. It calls this setup function that we specify here, and then we can lay it all out and do whatever we want. And then any functions that we want, more or less the controller of our UI, if we're doing an MVC, the model view controller. This is our controller stuff down here, and we are handling that. So this can, I don't know if you guys can hear it. I think I have the sounds off, but you can actually, it's making sounds. And then some really cool things that we did with this is that we also made it so not only does it hot reload, but it will persist the model of the MVC. So that way, if we're currently editing something, we need to get our UI into a specific state because we're testing that. Let's say we clicked on a section and then a category and then a subcategory, and we scroll down a list and we're looking at a specific item that maybe is off, perhaps because the name is really long or whatever. Then we can actually have the game or the UI stay in that state and edit it. So if we say testing, and we select a few things, and we're like, you know what, actually let's jump over to our, and this is actually something I haven't shown yet, is that we have a UIS file the core UIS. So we can say, you know what, let's change the edit label font color so that way it's a different color here. And suddenly it changes. Hey, we can see it, but it actually still like even has the text highlighted and the text is still there. Whereas like if we weren't storing the model, it would reset it to the default state, which is it would erase all the text. You know, we wouldn't have this stuff be highlighted anymore. And, you know, all this state would be reset. And so this is really awesome because now we can have things be populated and the model be persisted. Big win there. This is a feature that I didn't have for Korea, and I'm sure like having the hot reloading is extremely helpful. And this is just like the cherry on top where it stores the model. And yeah, it's awesome. I'm excited to actually be using it in the future. Right now, we're not using it. We've kind of moved on to other things. But yeah, that's actually it for the recap video. So we did our Lua bindings using Sol, and then we exposed our prefab stuff, got hot reloading for that. We exposed our Lua. Our UI, and then we did hot reloading for that using Sol, awesome library, and our now somewhat bad but somewhat usable Lua exposed Python script, and yeah, that's it. So I just want to say thank you for viewers, for people supporting me, for the patrons on my Patreon. I really appreciate it. If you guys are enjoying this and want to support my channel here on Twitch or YouTube, then Patreon is a great way to do that. You can get access to the source code so you can follow along. It's also MIT licensed, so you can use it for your own projects. It's still, you know, very early in development, but I'm continuing to update it and you'll have access to the repository. So yeah, thank you guys. That's going to be it for this recap video. We're going to be back soon with more recap videos, going to try to keep them a little bit more consistent. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. See you next time.